One liver. Just one. Enough to poison dozens of people. It didn't come from a lab or a factory. It came out of a bear. A predator's body isn't just muscle. It's a record of everything that passed through the chain beneath it. And some of what passes upward doesn't disappear. Your ancestors had no name for that. They just learned to avoid it. No known civilization ever built a diet around lions, or wolves, or tigers, not out of taste alone, and not out of superstition either. Something quieter was at work, hidden in plain sight, and your ancestors learned to read it long before science could explain why. Start with the math, because the math came first. Every time energy moves up a chain, most of it simply disappears. A plant catches sunlight and turns it into tissue. An animal eats that plant but keeps only a fraction, the rest burned off just staying alive. As a rough rule of thumb, only about 10% survives each jump. 1,000 calories stored in plants becomes roughly 100 calories of herbivore, and only a fraction of that ever reaches the predator above it. By the time you reach the top, very little energy is left to pay for the chase. A wolf needs pounds of meat a day just to stay alive, feeding no one but itself. Now imagine feeding a whole family on prey, that expensive and that poor in return. The numbers never worked. Think about what a hunt like that actually looked like. A wolf doesn't wait to be hunted. It runs in a pack, with teeth built for exactly this kind of fight, and instincts sharpened over generations of doing exactly this. Corner one and the odds turn grim fast. A torn leg, a broken hand, or nothing at all. A deer just runs. 2 very different afternoons for a fraction of the reward. A spear changed the odds. It didn't erase them. A wolf pack fights back as one. A deer almost never does. Hunger doesn't wait for a fair fight. It waits for the safest one. But energy is something you can count on paper. What came next couldn't be counted, or seen, or smelled. Not until it was already inside you. Every time one animal eats another, it inherits more than meat. It inherits some of what that animal absorbed across its whole life. Mercury, certain industrial chemicals, some pesticides, fat-soluble pollutants like PCBs tend to build up in tissue instead of breaking down, and at the top of a chain, concentrations climb far higher than where they started. Scientists call this biomagnification, and one of the clearest cases alive today isn't on land at all. It's in the ocean, inside orcas, not because the ocean is dirtier, but because nothing at sea sits higher on the chain. In January of 2016, a killer whale named Lulu washed up dead in Scotland, tangled in fishing rope, one of the last of a small, doomed pod that had spent decades at the top of its world. Researchers who studied her blubber found PCB levels 100 times higher than what's considered safe. They later modeled that same exposure across killer whale populations worldwide, and the conclusion was grim. More than half could face collapse if those levels stayed high, especially populations that fed on other predators. Orcas never manufactured a single one of those chemicals. They simply spent a lifetime concentrating what the ocean handed them, a body slowly filling with everyone else's leftovers, rather than any purity or power of its own. Researchers have measured PCBs in some orcas as high as 1,300 milligrams per kilogram, and at levels far lower than that, PCBs are already linked to weakened fertility and a damaged immune system. It's part of why health authorities today advise pregnant women to limit shark, swordfish, and king mackerel, predators sitting on that same kind of chain, carrying a version of the same debt, just measured now in parts per million instead of a whale's necropsy report. Even if the toxins stayed low, one more problem waited inside the meat itself. Predators that scavenge raw flesh carry parasites built for exactly that lifestyle. The most notorious is trichinella, a microscopic worm that coils in muscle, waiting. Eat infected meat undercooked and the larvae hatch in your gut, then migrate into your own muscles. Fever climbs. The body swells, slowly, then all at once. In pre-modern medicine, this could kill you, and there was no way to see it coming. Just the weight, the fever, and hoping it passed. Cooking kills the parasite, but a meal eaten too quickly could turn your food into your infection. On top of that, the meat is simply harder to eat. Predators are built lean, for speed rather than stored fat, which makes the muscle dense and tough. Hunters who've eaten bear across different seasons describe it as night and day, A spring bear tasting nothing like the same animal in fall. A domesticated animal on a controlled diet gives you far less of that unpredictability. Nature stacked the deck early, long before anyone chose what to farm. Underneath all of that, something even older was working against the idea. Something no one had to teach you. Psychologist Paul Rosen, who spent decades studying disgust, found that humans react to the thought of eating carnivores almost before they can explain why. Children show the same reaction before anyone has taught them anything. And it turns up across cultures that never had any contact with one another, which is exactly the kind of pattern researchers pay attention to. The theory is simple. Ancestors who felt nothing about eating a predator sometimes died from what it carried. Ancestors who felt revulsion, without knowing why, survived more often, and that feeling got passed down, not as a fact but as a flinch. Try to imagine biting into a wolf steak right now. Something in you resists before your mind even finishes the thought. That resistance isn't taste. It's older than taste, older than any recipe your culture ever wrote down. So by every measure that matters, predator meat was inefficient, sometimes toxic, sometimes dangerous, and often unpleasant. Enough reasons stacked together that no group of people ever built a lasting diet around it. But stacked reasons aren't a wall. Now and then, someone crossed it anyway, not as a habit, but as a single, desperate exception. For years, the standard theory in archaeology was that ancient humans only ever killed large predators for their skins, never for food, that a pelt was worth taking but the meat was left behind. It made a kind of sense. Skins kept people warm, and meat from a predator barely paid for the risk of the hunt. Then researchers went back to the bones, and what they found in Germany quietly rewrote that story. In Siegdorf, scientists examined a cave lion skeleton, roughly 48,000 years old. Along the third rib, they found a puncture wound, too deep for a bite mark and too precise for an accident. A ballistic reconstruction, published in the journal Scientific Reports, matched it to a wooden thrusting spear, the same kind Neanderthals used on deer. Cut marks covered several other bones too, across the femur, the pelvis, the vertebrae, not just around the ribs. Researchers behind the study called it the earliest confirmed instance of a large predator being deliberately hunted in the human record. Not scavenged, not stumbled upon, but hunted, and then butchered at the kill site. The team even reconstructed the angle of the strike. A hunter likely standing, thrusting low into the abdomen while the animal rested on its side, unaware, in the last calm moment it would ever have. It would have taken nerve, a plan, and a group willing to trust that plan with their lives. In another German cave called Einhornhöhle, researchers found lion toe bones nearly 200,000 years old, cut in a pattern used to remove a pelt with the claws still intact. Together, the two sites tell a fuller story. Sometimes a lion's skin became a cloak, sometimes its meat became a meal, rare, deliberate, and only when the calculations somehow tipped the other way. Never a dish, never a staple, never something a culture built a diet around. So the pattern holds. Not a diet, not a tradition, only rare, isolated exceptions. And those exceptions came with a body count of their own, one that would play out again in the ice near the top of the world. In the summer of 1596, a Dutch expedition led by Willem Barents set out to find a northern route to Asia, and instead found itself trapped by ice near Novaya Zemlya, north of Russia. Winter came fast, and supplies ran out faster. The crew killed a polar bear and cooked its organs into a stew, liver included. Gerrit de Veer, one of the sailors, later wrote that his crewmates fell violently ill soon afterward, and that skin began peeling from their bodies in sheets as they recovered. They survived. Barely. Explorers who followed over the next 3 centuries weren't always so lucky. The culprit turned out to be vitamin A. Polar bears sit at the top of a marine chain thick with fish oils, and they store an extraordinary concentration of it in their livers, enough in a single one to cause severe poisoning in dozens of people at once. A bear's body is built to hold that load. A human's is not. The men who survived that winter described pressure building behind their eyes and vertigo that wouldn't lift even lying down. This wasn't ordinary food poisoning. It was a nutrient their own bodies needed in small amounts, delivered in a dose built for an animal roughly the size of a small car. What makes the story stranger is what Arctic indigenous peoples had already known long before any European ship arrived. Several communities developed rules about which parts of a bear could be eaten, the liver chief among them, enforced with no laboratory, no chemistry, no concept of vitamins at all. When explorers dismissed those warnings as superstition, some of them paid for it exactly the way De Vere described. Knowledge like that doesn't need a laboratory. It only needs someone who survived, and someone willing to listen. That pattern, danger first, then a rule to contain it, then the rule outliving the memory of why, shows up far beyond the Arctic. Traditional Jewish law forbids eating birds of prey and other flesh-eating animals outright. Islamic teaching prohibits animals that kill with fangs or claws, a category that removes most carnivores from the table by definition. It isn't only religious law either. Among several indigenous North American communities, including Ojibwe tradition, certain animals are recognized as kin rather than food, protected by cultural rule no matter how plentiful they are. Researchers who study food taboos across cultures have noticed something telling. Prohibitions around meat appear again and again, even among cultures separated by vast distances and long stretches of time. Some anthropologists argue these rules preserve older knowledge, ecological or medical, transformed over generations into instructions that no longer needed their original reasons attached. No footnote, no warning label, just an instruction obeyed for its own sake. That doesn't mean every taboo began as survival math, though. Jewish law, Islamic teaching, and Ojibwe tradition each grew from its own distinct history, and collapsing them into one tidy origin story would be too neat. Still, whatever knowledge shaped at least some of these rules clearly outlived the people who first discovered it, passed down not as a fact anyone could explain, but as a feeling nobody thought to question, the wasted energy climbing every step of a chain, the chemicals stacking quietly in an orca that never asked to become a warning sign, the parasites waiting in undercooked muscle, the flinch you'd feel at the thought of a wolf steak, a spear thrust into a cave lion's ribs, 48,000 years ago, a diary describing skin peeling away in sheets, on an island frozen in ice, a rule against eating fanged animals, written into scripture before anyone had a word for a toxin. None of it was ever really about the animal. It was about the record hiding inside it, the one no predator ever asked to keep. Tonight, you'll eat the one animal that never had to keep one.